From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. Centrist parties across the European Union have heavily suffered in the bloc's parliamentary elections, with the far right and Green parties making major gains. The far right are set to take 74 seats, up from 37, while the Green Alliance is set to increase its number of seats from 50 to 75. The right-wing European People's Party is set to take the highest number of seats, but still recorded significant losses, dropping from 221 to 165. There has been a lukewarm response to its proposed candidate for the presidency of the EU Commission, German MEP Manfred Weber. Voter turnout increased to over 50% across the bloc.
Campaigning on climate action.
Meanwhile, Bas Eickhout, one of the leading candidates for European Greens, expressed satisfaction with the results.
First of all, from our side, we want to thank all the voters coming out, but especially, of course, the voters who are very clearly asking for change, asking change for a new Europe, a Europe that is fighting climate change, a Europe that is looking for a green transition in a socially just way, and a Europe that is fighting for the rule of law and fighting to uphold the democracies in all the member states. And that is a Europe that has been voted for, and where we as Greens have been performed even better than the polls have predicted. And that is really something that we are very thankful for, very grateful, and we see it also as a very important responsibility to deliver on that in the coming 5 years.
And Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras has called for an early national election following the defeat of his party at the EU elections. The PM says he will visit the president to request the early dissolution of parliament after the second round of local and regional elections on June 2nd. This puts the election date at June 30 at the earliest. The government's term expires in October. And police have arrested at least 200 yellow vest protesters in Belgium during the final day of voting in the European Parliament elections. Police used tear gas on protesters who took to the streets of Brussels, calling the European Union anti-democratic and ultra-liberal. Police say the demonstration was not authorized. Yellow vest protests began last November in France following public anger against fuel tax rises. In other news, Bolivia has assumed the pro-tempore presidency of the Andean Community of Nations bloc for a period of a year. The handover of the presidency from Peru to Bolivia was done on Sunday at the CAN summit held in Lima. It was attended by the presidents and foreign ministers of Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia and Peru. Peru's President Martín Vizcarra urged the bloc to take decisive action to combat corruption and climate change.
Together we have seen that we have a new danger that is affecting our countries, which is corruption. Corruption which does not recognize borders, and as a result, if we want to fight it adequately, we must also articulate common strategies. We are countries that have in the global framework the greatest vulnerability in the face of climate change, and we have to be together to fight it.
A Venezuelan government delegation is in Oslo, Norway for new talks with representatives of the country's opposition. Preliminary discussions began earlier this month, and President Nicolás Maduro held a send-off meeting with senior government officials on Saturday.
We're here reading the official statement released by the government of Norway. We're meeting to prepare because our delegation, the delegation of the Bolivarian government and revolutionary forces of Venezuela, are leaving for Venezuela to continue dialogue, to continue the conversations, to search for peace, always to search for peace and dialogue for our country. Jorge Rodriguez will preside over the delegation, and along with Héctor Rodriguez and Jorge Arreaza, will compose a good delegation that will bring the voice of Venezuela. I'd like to thank the government of Venezuela for all of their efforts to continue to provide this second step, ready to work on this integral agenda we have already agreed upon and move forward.
en buenos acuerdos.
Around 1,000 human rights activists and favela residents in Rio de Janeiro have taken to the streets to protest against police violence. Under the title "Stop Killing Us," protesters gathered Ipanema Beach as a mass demonstration in support of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, and this was happening simultaneously on a nearby beach. Bolsonaro supports the shoot-to-kill policy in neighborhoods like the favelas, where drug gangs operate. According to official figures, over 430 police killings took place in the first 3 months of 2019.
My feeling is anger, is sorrow and sadness. I'm here. My son will not come back. Nothing that I or someone else does will bring my son back. But I would like this police violence in the favela to stop so no other mother feels what I'm feeling.
Shows of support for far-right Brazilian President Bolsonaro and his neoliberal reforms took place in cities around the country. Brian Meir, our correspondent in Sao Paulo, has the story.
In dozens of cities across Brazil, tens of thousands of right-wing protesters came out today in support of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro and his ultra-neoliberal austerity reforms. Now, this was meant to be a response to the historic student and teacher strike that took place on May 15th, which brought millions of people to the streets in all 26 states. But as the right started infighting and as key allies of Bolsonaro started stepping out and saying they weren't going, the crowd expectations shrunk and shrunk to the point where in Brasilia, the national capital, there were only a few thousand people out there. And as a result of this underwhelming show of support for the beleaguered president, a group of senators announced this evening that they're going to start investigating ways to pass a constitutional amendment to remove the president from office without an impeachment.
Brian Meir from Brazil. And clashes at a prison in Brazil's Amazonas state have left 15 inmates dead. According to authorities, the clashes broke out at around 11 a.m. local time on Sunday during visiting hours. Most of the dead were stabbed with toothbrushes or strangled to death. The cause of the clashes are still being investigated. A riot at the same facility in January 2017 killed 56 inmates.
Around 11 a.m. an internal fight broke out in pavilions 5 and 3, leading the warden to activate immediately the prison intervention group. The riot caused the death of 15 inmates. The prison intervention group's action was fundamental so we could maintain control. The incident started around 11 a.m. and by 11:40 it had been contained.
Meanwhile, in Venezuela, the families of inmates who died during the riot at a police station jail have appealed to the government to investigate the riot that led to their relatives' death. 29 inmates died during this riot in the town of Acarigua in the state of Portuguesa.
They blame those guys in there, but I need someone to explain to me, how is it possible that in a police station with so much security they have weapons and even grenades?
What happened here is a massacre of young boys, 18 to 25 years old, 29 men who were killed, and we want this not to go unpunished.
More stories coming up, don't go away. Welcome back. Mexico's Secretary of Environment and Natural Resources, Josefa González Blanco, has resigned. In her resignation letter, she said she stepped down because she caused the delay of a passenger flight when leaving for a work tour. On her letter, she wrote, quote, "Mexico's true transformation requires total compliance with equality and justice, and no one should have privileges." It's unknown whether President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has accepted her resignation. Former President of Argentina, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, held her first vice presidential camp rally on Saturday, ahead of the year's election. Presidential candidate Alberto Fernández shared the stage in the town of Merlo in the province of Buenos Aires. It was just last weekend when Fernandez de Kirchner announced her run, one which is expected to attract support from social movements and trade organizations.
I want to tell you not to expect that two leaders can do everything. I believe that we, together, will also demand a meeting, and also, as I have been saying for a long time, a social contract that allows us to understand that there are no individual triumphs, no individual achievements if the realization of a society is not collective.
We were able to eliminate Argentina's external debt without making any Argentine suffer the cost of getting out of that debt.
In Brazil, the Lula Libre Festival is kicking off to raise the issue of lawfare against former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Lula was arrested for allegedly receiving a luxury apartment by the Odebrecht construction company in exchange for contracts with the state-owned oil company Petrobras. Lula and the Workers' Party deny the charges. And Lula is once again condemning the actions of Judge Sergio Moro, who ordered his arrest. In an interview, Lula said this was all a plot to prevent him from taking part in the 2018 presidential elections. Earlier this month, the American Association of Jurists said Lula was a political prisoner. It's been 11 years since Peru signed the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. However, local organizations say to date, the government has failed to honor these obligations.
Madeline spends most of her day taking care of her 23-year-old daughter, who is living with cerebral palsy. Although the law facilitates her to change or rearrange her work schedule, she was forced to resign as a nurse in the Trujillo hospital in the north of Peru.
They've only given us discounts and told us to find caretakers for our sons and daughters. They've also given us an ultimatum to choose between our jobs or our children.
And did you choose your daughter?
I chose my daughter. I'm a mother first, and if I have to sell things, cook for someone or wash their clothes, and leave my profession behind to take care of my daughter, that is what I will do.
The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities says the relatives in charge of taking care of these people must have reasonable adjustment to their work and job schedules. However, this has never occurred.
Employers used to tell me, it's either you resign or we fire you. That's the kind of influence they have over us. And the state does not take into account the real needs of persons living with disabilities, the way they eat, how their therapy works, how we pay for their diapers, medicines, neurologists, psychiatrists, or pediatricians. We've just been abandoned.
According to the Ombudsman's office, state entities fail to fulfill these obligations under law, causing many families of persons with disabilities not to have access to proper jobs, condemning them to a life of poverty and indignation.
The authorities are totally aware of these issues. What surprises us is that they don't solve it. It's great that the Ombudsman continues fighting alongside mothers who have children with disabilities. Since the convention was signed, we started once again to inform the various authorities about our challenges. We hope to get an acceptable answer.
According to the last census in 2017, around 3 million Peruvians suffer from some kind of disability, 40% of which are serious conditions.
Guyana has celebrated its 53rd anniversary of independence from British colonial rule under the theme, A United Guyanese Are We at 53. On the occasion, CARICOM has condemned Guyana's significant contribution to the global fight against climate change through the preservation of its forests. The island, which is home to CARICOM's headquarters, has also been an integral part of the regional integration movement. Guyana is the third smallest independent state and the only English-speaking one on the mainland of South America. CARICOM is facing economic challenges after international financial institutions cut ties with correspondent banks that would have enabled cross-border payments. CARICOM chairman Timothy Harris said the practice has a harmful effect on money transfers from the large Caribbean diaspora to their families back home. He says commercial trade payments are also negatively impacted. For businesses, an overnight bank wire transfer of funds from the US now takes as many as 3 months or more for delivery. The CARICOM chairman says global banks were also offering their services at unconscionable high rates. El Salvador's FMLN youth wing spent the day voting in internal elections to select the leadership of its National Youth Secretariat for the next 5 years. 2,000 young Salvadorans participated. The winner of the race was Yasael Torres, who said he takes on the responsibility, knowing that it won't be an easy task. He said the FMLN will continue in the footsteps of Marxist-Leninist revolutionary and campesino Farabundo Martí.
I know that it won't be an easy task, and that's why, working out through those doors and coming out of this process, we must be more united, because the battles to come will only be won if we are together. The enemy is not in our home, the enemy is outside.
Mozambique's urban areas and its countryside were both greatly affected by Cyclone Idai. But it is precisely in these areas where the solidarity of Brazilian campesinos towards their Mozambican brothers is shown. Our correspondent Andre Vieira has more.
This community, located in Mozambique's central area, is still recovering from the consequences of Cyclone Idai, which hit on March 14. In addition to winds of more than 200 kilometers per hour, the Bozi River flooded lowest set regions 2 days after the cyclone hit. Amindo and his family had to stay on top of a tree for 3 days in order to survive.
We were dragged by the water when we were already on the roof of our house. We ended up almost in the middle of the Bozi River, and we were there for 3 days. On Monday, a man who had a canoe finally managed to rescue us.
2 months have passed since Cyclone Idai hit communities like Hamamba, located in the province of Sofala, remain without power. Here, rural workers have also lost all their crops after the disaster. Mozambique has almost 28 million citizens, with 60% of them living in rural areas. This is a place where people depend on food grown in their communities for survival.
After the rains, the winds came. The cyclone began to destroy houses. The fields were flooded in lower areas, and all crops were damaged by the water.
Another difficulty is access to clean water, which is stored in tanks. There is also an epidemic of malaria in this region. To provide aid, the Brazilian Landless Workers Movement and the Adecro de Mozambique organization founded the October 14th Brigade to help in health, education, agriculture, construction, among other things. For them, this is about working alongside the Mozambican people.
What I want to know is how they work here, as it is a chance to have a completely new experience.
International solidarity is very important, but the main element for the reconstruction of Mozambique lays somewhere else.
We are people who will always fight. We have always fought in wars and for lands. That's why we overcome. We are very strong.
It is in Sofala where the ties between Brazil and Mozambique are being further strengthened.
Some 70,000 families in Paraguay have been displaced due to continuous flooding of the Paraguay River. Weeks of heavy rains caused rivers to overflow. According to the Department of Meteorology and Hydrology, water is nearing disaster levels in the capital Asunción, reaching over 7.5 meters in some places. Many have remained in their flooded houses. We're taking one last break, but stay with us. Welcome back. More than 8,000 immigrants taken into custody in the U.S. were held in solitary confinement under both the Obama and the Trump administrations. Thousands of documents covering a 5-year period revealed more than half were not for rule violations, with at least 6 committing suicide. A third of the people were segregated for mental illnesses, disabilities, or for what U.S. immigration said was for safety reasons. One detainee was reportedly held in solitary confinement for 390 days. U.S. President Donald Trump has wrapped up his 4th-day visit to Japan with a joint press conference with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. During the press conference, Trump and Abe discussed a number of issues, including Iran, trade with China, and the deadlock talks between the U.S. and North Korea. Trump claimed that there is great respect between his country and North Korea.
I'm in no rush at all. The sanctions remain. We have our hostages back. We, as you know, are getting the remains, continuing to get the remains. A lot of good things are happening. And very importantly, there's been no nuclear testing for 2 years. I looked at a chart the other day. During the past administration, there were many numbers that were very high, like 10 and 12 and 18, having to do with missile launches and nuclear testing. And for the last 2 years on the bottom, it had 0 and 0. So I am very happy with the way it's going, and intelligent people agree with me.
And Trump also spoke about the trade negotiations with China and said that Washington was not ready to make a deal with Beijing, but he expected one in the future.
As far as China is concerned, they want to make a deal. I think they probably wish they made the deal that they had on the table before they tried to renegotiate it. They would like to make a deal. We're not ready to make a deal, and we're taking in tens of billions of dollars of tariffs, and that number could go up very, very substantially, very easily. But I think sometime in the future, China and the United States will absolutely have a great trade deal, and we look forward to that.
Meanwhile, the Chinese government has said any future trade talks with the United States must be based on mutual respect. The spokesperson from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Lu Kang, said that his country remains hopeful that any differences can be resolved through negotiations and consultations.
We always believe that, first, any differences between any two countries should of course be resolved through friendly negotiations and consultations. This also applies to resolving economic and trade differences between China and the United States. Second, we have always insisted on consultations between China and the United States, including economic and trade consultations.
Fighters loyal to Khalifa Haftar continue their assault on the south of the Libyan capital, Tripoli. The forces reportedly advanced in an offensive against the United Nations-backed government fighters. Haftar had earlier vowed to fight until rivals laid down their weapons. Negotiations for peace have not yet brought any positive results. The offensive was launched in early April against the government of Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj. Zimbabwe's main opposition party, the Movement for Democratic Change, has elected Nelson Chamisa as its leader. This was the first election to be held after the death of the party's founding president, Morgan Tsvangirai, that brought many divisions within the party. The newly elected leader dismissed allegations by other party members who said there were voting irregularities in the process.
You know, our party is one of the best in the world. I mean, we have a template of democracy. Look at these people. They've not been given a saying by the party. It's all hard work, service, and sacrifice to the party, and we are proud of it. Look at the candidates. They don't hate each other. They compete openly. They smile. They love each other. Though, of course, internally they are bending. You know, a lot of them have lost weight, but you can tell that they are really trying their best to make sure that democracy is at work. Thank you.
After suffering a debilitating defeat, Australia's Labour opposition has chosen a new leader. Anthony Albanese will now lead the party after his predecessor, Bill Shorten, resigned on May 18th. Shorten's resignation follows their loss of the election to Prime Minister Scott Morrison.
About our nation and the
same-sex couples held a mass wedding banquet in Taipei, a week after Taiwan's parliament passed a bill that endorsed same-sex marriages. Couples walked hand in hand down the red carpet in front of the presidential palace, celebrating the first LGBTQ community's legal acknowledgement in Asia. Same-sex marriage is still not allowed in many parts of Asia.
I think we are witnessing history. We are very happy to be a part of it, very happy. I hope whether or not we get married, whether or not we decide to be together, depending on the passing of the marriage equality law, those are all just external factors. I only hope that those who want to get married will not be prevented from doing so by law.
And with that, we end our news brief. But remember, you can find all of our stories by checking our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.